Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. All right, happy Apostata, everybody. In regards to the topic this evening, and not long ago, thus have I heard, during one of the Wednesday events, actually last Wednesday, Ryan spoke up and he said, right view. Bante, when people speak of right view, what are they speaking of? To which Venerable Tahn Pamutto said, right view, right view. Aren't I always talking about right view? Didn't we just talk about that last week? Wasn't that the subject of the last day-long retreat, whenever that was? Aren't you bored of hearing about right view yet? And I thought maybe some people might have found that to be not the most satisfying of suttas. So I looked up one in which the Venerable Sariputta was asked this question. His right view is a bit of a it's vastly important. Like right view is the difference between making any progress on the path and not making any progress on the path. And yet it is a nebulous concept. It is not easy to pin down exactly what right view is. And in many instances, throughout the Buddhist traditions, there's this almost this feeling of like riddles or koans to the nature of right view. You look it up, and it's like this circular definition. You know, what is right view? Well, it's the absence of wrong view. And you're like, okay, fine, 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 whatever. And you go and you look up wrong view, and it's the presence of right view. And you say, well, what am I supposed to do with this? Or maybe you get a more straightforward definition, like we find in the doctrinal definition of the Eightfold Path, which starts with right view, which is based on right view. And right view is listed as the knowledge of the Four Noble Truths. And this is the way that the Buddha frames it in the very first sermon, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. He explains the nature of the Four Noble Truths, the existence of suffering, where that suffering comes from, the fact that suffering can cease without remainder, and how to reach that cessation, because that's what the whole project is about, reaching the end of suffering. And the result of the Buddha explaining the Four Noble Truths to the five disciples is that one of them got it. And this is the first instance of right view arising based on hearing the Dhamma. So, I mean, if anything, that's it's a pretty concrete example. I mean, the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths. Somebody got it. There was not right view. Something was said, and then there was right view. So maybe we should look at the Four Noble Truths. But as you'll go through the suttas, you go through the canon, as you'll listen to various teachers, you might start to get a sense that one one concise little definition doesn't quite do it. There's a lot of different ways of approaching the concept of view. When you first start out, the concept of wrong view is very important. Figuring out what are the things that cause you to fall into doubt, into speculation. What are the ideas that we almost seem to be born with, despite the fact that they can't be proven, they don't work, they lead us to suffer. Ideas like permanence, or the existence of a soul or a self, or just the concept of happiness, something that is intrinsically satisfying in the world. We're so certain it exists that we spend our entire lives pursuing it until we encounter the Dhamma. And then the Buddha says very simply, it's like, hey, I've seen a lot. I've never found any such thing. There is nothing that is intrinsically satisfying. Yeah? In fact, If you look at all things, because they change, they are intrinsically unsatisfying. They will always, in some way, let you down. Yeah, and this is their basic nature. So getting that can be part of right view, because once you shed these concepts, you're no longer tied down to these erroneous ideas, these crazy ideas that we seem to that just pop up into our minds out of nowhere. Like, well, why do we think this way? Why are we so certain there's a permanent me somewhere? But when somebody stops us and says, okay, well, then let's chop you up and figure out where it is, you can't find it. Anything you can point to, you definitely know that is not yourself. Just by virtue of the fact that you can point to it means it's a thing, means it has a beginning and an end. Yeah. And then if you go so far as to say, well, maybe this permanent self is not a thing. Well, if it's not a thing, then who cares? It doesn't exist. So why would we orient ourselves based on something that doesn't exist? That's not provable, that's not experienceable. And the Dhamma tends to direct us to those things which are provable, experienceable, truth, stable. Yeah. And so getting rid of wrong views becomes the beginning of this project. But once we deal with some of the obvious, sort of whack-a-mole, wrong views, we're left in this space where we're kind of wondering at times, like, do I have right view? I seem to be suffering. I seem to still have some delusion. I still seem to get angry or greedy at times. So maybe I don't have right view. And so it's very natural to start going to the books and start asking, well, what is it? What is this right view? Because it's not merely that I want to have not wrong view. I mean, that's nice that it will reduce the suffering, but how do I get like right view, like concrete, always present, stable, consistent right view? And then we fall into all of these various definitions, and we realize that that's the entirety of the path is working through all the different iterations of what it is to see reality in accord with reality, to see truth in accord with truth. Yeah. So, let's see if I can share a sutta here. So we have, oh, that's interesting. I can't do that while you're all watching, huh? Let's try that again. Okay, here we have Majjhima Nikaya Sutta number 9, and this is the name of the sutta is actually Right View Sammaditthi. Yeah. Thus have I heard, on one occasion the Blessed One was living at Savatthi in Chaitas Grove in Anathapindika's park, but this doesn't actually deal with him. Because there the Venerable Sariputta was living, and he addressed the monks around him thus, Friends, friend, they replied, because this was at a time when the Buddha was still alive, and it wasn't until after the Buddha passed away that they started referring to each other as Venerable. Before that, they were all the same rank, they were all just friends. The Venerable Sariputta said this, One of right view, one of right view. It is, friends. In what way is a noble disciple one of right view, whose view is straight, who has unwavering confidence in the Dhamma, has arrived at the true Dhamma? And the monks around said, Indeed, friend, we would come from far away to learn from the Venerable Sariputta the meaning of this statement. It'd be good if the Venerable Sariputta would explain the meaning of this statement. Having heard it from him, the monks will remember it. Then, friends, listen and closely attend to what I shall say. Yes, friend, the monks replied, and the Venerable Sariputta said this. The first definition that Venerable Sariputta arrives at deals with the nature of what is essential, what is unessential, what is wholesome, what is unwholesome, what is skillful, and what is unskillful. When, friends, a noble disciple understands the unwholesome and the root of the unwholesome, the wholesome and the root of the wholesome, in that way he is one of right view, whose view is straight, who has unwavering confidence in the Dhamma, and has arrived at the true Dhamma. What, friends, is unwholesome? What is the root of the unwholesome? Killing living beings is unwholesome. Taking what is not given is unwholesome. Misconduct in sensual pleasures is unwholesome. False speech is unwholesome. Malicious speech is unwholesome. Harsh speech is unwholesome. Gossip is unwholesome. Covetousness is unwholesome. Ill will is unwholesome. Wrong view is unwholesome. This is called the unwholesome. What is the root of the unwholesome? Greed is the root of the unwholesome. Hate is the root of the unwholesome. Delusion is the root of the unwholesome. And what is the wholesome? Abstaining from killing living beings, abstaining from taking what is not given, abstaining from misconduct and sensual pleasures, abstaining from false speech, abstaining from malicious speech, abstaining from harsh speech, abstaining from gossip, abstaining from uh, uh, yeah, uncovetousness is wholesome. Non-ill will is wholesome. Right view is wholesome. This is called the wholesome. What is the root of the wholesome? Non-greed is the root of the wholesome. Non-hate is the root of the wholesome. Non-delusion is the root of the wholesome. This is called the root of the wholesome. When a noble disciple has thus understood the unwholesome and the root of the unwholesome, the wholesome and the root of the wholesome, he entirely abandons the underlying tendency to lust. He abolishes the underlying tendency to aversion. He extirpates the underlying tendency to the view and conceit, I am. And by abandoning ignorance and arousing true knowledge, he there and now makes an end of suffering. In that way, a noble disciple is one of right view, whose view is straight, who has an unwavering confidence in the Dhamma, and has arrived at the true Dhamma. And this is the idea of right view as a beginning of the dawning of understanding that not everything in the world is of equal value to one on the spiritual path. Before the spiritual path, it's all kind of the same. It's all samsara. It's all a big mess that you're just wading through and trying to be as comfortable as possible while suffering as little as possible. That is the nature of samsara. Things just have whatever meaning that you give them. There's no real direction to it. It loops back on itself. But once one begins a spiritual journey, one begins to have to filter out what is worthwhile and what is not worthwhile, what needs to be abandoned and what needs to be cultivated. This idea of the wholesome and the unwholesome. There's a pair in the first chapter of the Dhammapada. Um, let's see, it's the Sutta Dhammapada 11 and Dhammapada 12. And Dhammapada 11 says, one who sees nonsense as essential thinks what is important is not. They never arrive on the right course on account of having wrong thoughts. And number 12 says, they who discern what's important and what is nonsense they can see through. On account of their right thinking, such a one arrives at truth. This is based on a Pali word, sara, and sara means essential, important, vital, useful, and this is what is that? It's a lot like right view. What is essential? Well, we have to investigate. If you have no goal, if you have no purpose, then what is essential and what is not essential is there is no such thing. It's all the same. But once you have a goal, then there are things which will help you in that goal, and there are things which will obstruct you from reaching that goal. And then you have a very clear sense. This stuff has to be abandoned, set aside, ignored, done away with. And this stuff has to be cultivated, made much of, made constant in my life. And that is how you reach any goal in your life. And the Buddhist path is no different. So, in this definition of right view, once we have the sense of the Four Noble Truths, once we have a sense that there is suffering and we would like to not suffer, then we have a goal. And once we have a goal, we've begun to divide things. And so, right view is the ability to see what is essential to this path, what is wholesome in this path, what develops this path, and those things which are unwholesome, unskillful, obstructing to this path. And right view is the very ability to make that discernment. Yeah. This definition also hints at the nature of greed, hatred, and delusion, and how essential these wholesome and unwholesome roots, this idea of roots in the mind is to figuring out what is essential and unessential because there are so many possible thoughts, so many possible words that we can speak, so many possible actions that we can do with our body, right? How do we figure out which ones are leading us in the right direction and which ones are leading us in the wrong direction? Well, if we can boil it down to greed, hatred, and delusion, non-greed, non-hatred, and non-delusion, that simplifies it a bit, doesn't it? Yeah, it gives us unessential and essential. And that's part of the mystery of the riddle of right view is you can't point to just one thing and say that is right view because how do you know if you have right view or wrong view? You have to look at your thoughts. You have to look at your speech. What are you saying? You have to look at your actions. These are indicators of your view. But because thought, speech, and actions are the symptoms of right view or wrong view, that means that view is somehow outside of them. It's somehow informing how we think, how we speak, how we act. Yeah. And so we look at how we think, speak, and act to get some sense of whether or not we're in line with our goal. Yeah. Is it obstructing us from our goal or is it leading us towards our goal? And if our thoughts, speech, and actions are in line with the precepts, they're in line with this is it's actually what the Venerable Sariputta just gave. How he gave the four precepts, not to kill, steal, cheat, or lie, and then he broke that down further into the four kinds of right speech. You know, not to lie, not to gossip, not to use malicious speech, um, not to use pointless speech. Yeah, and then taking that again and saying what is right thought, you know, thoughts of renunciation, thoughts of non-ill will, thoughts of non-cruelty. This is what we call the tenfold path. Yeah. These are the 10 courses of wholesome action, the 10 courses of unwholesome action. Yeah. This is it's just expanding a simple concept like the precepts and saying, well, you have to look at speech and thought as well. And if you do, you get, you know, it's not five precepts, it's sort of tenfold. Yeah. And this helps us orient. So, what is right view? Well, we know we have right view when we have a sense of a goal and we have a sense of what will lead us to it, and we have a sense of what will obstruct us. And there's something very curious about this is because view is outside of these very thoughts, speech, and actions, it is possible to have right view even when we have wrong thoughts, wrong speech, and wrong actions. Yeah. And this is something that's worth understanding because many of us get kind of down when after months or years or decades of practice, we still make some mistakes, right? And we still wonder, have I got any right view at all? I still have defilements. I'm still messing up. How could this be? Am I not even like chipping away at it? But view is outside of it. Yeah. And there's something very amazing, like when we can just when we have wrong thoughts, you know, thoughts of harming and grasping and cruelty, when we have wrong speech, when we're kind of gossiping or we're speaking bad of somebody, when we have wrong actions, when we have a mosquito land on us and we go, what? Before we even think about it, like, whoops, and I have to confess that at some point. Um, the fact that we know it, we know it's bad. We know it will produce suffering. We know there will be consequences. We know that it is these very things that will lead us further from our goal, and we don't want them. We don't want to cultivate them. The very fact that we know that means that, yes, we do have right view because that is the thing that is not present when we have wrong view. When we have wrong view, we don't see these things as obstructions. We don't have a goal. So we don't see essential and non-essential. Yeah. We don't know the difference between what is skillful and unskillful. The moment that we can make that discernment, we might still be a complete mess, but we at least have right view. Yeah. Continuing on with the sutta, we get into learning to use Zoom is kind of like learning to juggle. Okay. Venerable Sariputta goes on and he says, the monks say, might there be another way in which a noble disciple is one of right view? And Venerable Sariputta says, there might be, friends. When, friends, a noble disciple understands nutriment, the origin of nutriment, the cessation of nutriment, and the way leading to the cessation of nutriment, in that way they are a one of right view. What is nutriment, the origin of nutriment, the cessation of nutriment, and the way leading to the cessation of nutriment? There are four kinds of nutriment for the maintenance of beings that have already come to be and for the support of those who are about to come to be. What for? Physical food, gross or subtle. Sense contact as the second, mental volition as the third, and consciousness as the fourth. With the arising of craving, there is the arising of nutriment. With the cessation of craving, there is the cessation of nutriment. The way leading to the cessation of nutriment is just this noble eightfold path. That is, right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. When a noble disciple has understood nutriment, etc., he entirely abandons the underlying tendency to greed, aversion, and the view and conceit I am. By abandoning ignorance and arising true knowledge, he here and now makes an end of suffering. This is one who has right view. So nutriments, we did do, and this one I'm pretty certain about. We did do a day long about nutriment, and so you could go back and see that we talked about each of the four nutriments in length. But what is nutriment? Nutriment is the idea that all beings require some sort of sustenance to keep going. And in terms of our physical body, it's kind of obvious, right? And this is a great example that we can see, a physical example. Without food, the body wastes away and dies. It is the same with our minds. It turns out that our minds are not eternal. They are not everlasting. They are not an everlasting fountain of thoughts and views and activities. They need fuel. Yeah. We need to feed them. What is it that we feed them? We feed them sense contact. We feed them volitional patterns, and we feed the consciousness itself. Yeah, this is what keeps the mind going. And we know this. Anybody who's tried to meditate knows this. If you sit down to meditate and you close your eyes and you start thinking about something, you start thinking about something else, and then you start thinking about something else. And the thoughts, even though they're not eternal, even though as soon as they arise, they immediately cease and pass away, only to be replaced by new ones. Even though this is the case, they keep each other going. Yeah. It's this pattern, this catalytic reaction that just keeps going. One thought leads to another. And even though thoughts are ephemeral, transient, arising and ceasing, we manage to keep the mind chattering endlessly by cycling through them, often cycling through the same thoughts over and over and over again. And with meditation, we learn that we can kind of get in the way of this. And it takes some skill and it takes some application and it takes most of all the reason most people don't do it is because you have to want to. You have to actually want peace to kind of jump in there and say, well, let's not add thoughts. Let's not keep it going. Let's kind of undo this a little bit. Let's slow down. Let's consider. Let's observe for a minute because it's amazing what happens when you observe. When you observe, you're not adding anything. And when you don't add anything, because the mind is like a fire that needs fuel, it begins to burn down, burn down to little glowing coals. It's still very excitable. You shouldn't throw fuel on it, but you can see that it's now manageable. And this is our proof that the mind needs nutriment, and without nutriment, the mind will eventually cease. And for many, that can be a horrifying prospect. But once you start to get an idea of the fact that the mind is just a thing, we don't have to worry about it, ceasing because it's already arising and ceasing all the time. Yeah. There's nothing to worry about there. It's another Dhamma. It's another thing that just exists or doesn't exist. And the idea then of the mind ceasing is not so terrifying because what would happen when it ceases? Well, there would be peace. When we start to see the underlying dissatisfaction that is inherent in all things are letting us down subtly by shifting and avoiding being stable and satisfying. When we start to get that, then we see that, well, the absence of them would not be such a big deal. Yeah, nothing to be afraid of. And we get glimpses of actual peace where parts of the mind, because they don't have nutriment, go quiet. And in their absence, oh, it's wonderful. It's delightful. Finally, it has shut up. Yeah, it's an experience you don't get for free. You've got to go look for it. You've got to put in the causes and conditions for it. But once you do, you're very satisfied with the results. Yeah, because it turns out that peace is a lot better than not peace. Peace is a lot better than chaos. And then once you get that, you start to understand that maybe I don't want to throw more fuel in the fire. And then you understand nutriment. When you understand nutriment, you understand the Eightfold Path. You understand the Eightfold Path is about cutting down on the nutriment for unwholesome patterns of mind. Continuing on with the Venerable Sariputta, he then goes on to talk about the Four Noble Truths as an example of right view. And again, this is our doctrinal, like, what is right view? Well, it is understanding suffering, the origin of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the way leading to the cessation of suffering. What is suffering? Birth is suffering, aging is suffering, sickness is suffering, death is suffering. Sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair are suffering. Not to obtain what one wants is suffering. In short, the five aggregates affected by clinging are suffering. This is what we mean by suffering. What is the origin of suffering? It is just this craving which brings the renewal of becoming, is accompanied by delight and lust and delights in this and that. That is craving for sense pleasures, craving for being, craving for non-being. This is called the origin of suffering. What is the cessation of suffering? It is the remainderless fading away and ceasing, the giving up, relinquishing, letting go, and rejecting of that very same craving. This is what we call the cessation of suffering. What is the way to the cessation of suffering? It is just this noble eightfold path. When a noble disciple has thus understood suffering, the origin of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the way leading to the cessation of suffering, they here and now make an end of suffering. That is a disciple who has right view. And I won't go very much at length on this because we go we do talk about the Four Noble Truths, and we will talk about them again because of course we'll cycle back through. So I'll move on. But this is an example and a doctrinal example where right view is related to understanding this nature of suffering. Because once you get that, you get there is a project. There is suffering. It's coming from a source. It has a nutriment. It has that which is fueling it. But with the absence, the cessation of that fuel, you will have the cessation of suffering. And the Eightfold Path is, again, how you tease out what are the fuels for our suffering and you remove them. Sariputta goes on, and the monks ask, is there another way a noble disciple can have one of your right view? And Sariputta obliges, because there are many possible ways of approaching this idea of right view. And Sariputta says, aging and death. When one understands aging and death, where it comes from, where it ceases, and the way leading to its cessation. And it says using the formula of the Four Noble Truths for an aspect of the Four Noble Truths, an aspect of dependent origination. He says, what is aging and death? The aging of beings in the various order of beings, their old age, brokenness of teeth, grayness of hair, wrinkling of skin, decline of life, weakness of faculties. This is called aging. The passing of beings out of the various order of beings, their passing away, dissolution, disappearance, dying, completion of their time, dissolution of their aggregates, the laying down of their bodies. This is called death. So this aging and death are what is called aging and death. With the arising of birth, there is the arising of aging and death. With the cessation of birth, there is the cessation of aging and death. Understanding this and the way leading to the cessation of aging and death is just this Noble Eightfold Path. So in this definition of right view, Venerable Sariputta is pointing out that aging and death too has a nutriment, it has a condition. And this condition is one of the great insights of the Buddha, one of the reasons we talk about rebirth and the understanding of rebirth as an important function in getting why suffering, why samsara keeps going, is that the reason we grow old and die is because we were born. It is the nature of a being that is born to grow old and die. This is just how things are set up. But if one were to not be born, one would not therefore grow old and die. And it's very counterintuitive. It's very strange to think in that way. But again, this is an amazing insight. Because aging and death is guaranteed if we take birth. And so if we're asking, why, God, why do I suffer? Why do I grow old? Why do I grow sick? Why do I die? The answer, because you were born, stupid. Well, we should take it to heart. If we do something about the cause, we will do something about the result, which is aging and death. Venerable Sariputta goes on and says, well, what is birth? What is the origin of birth, the cessation of birth, the way leading to the cessation of birth? The birth of beings in the various order of beings, they're coming to birth, precipitation in a womb, generation, manifestation, and the aggregates, obtaining the basis for contact. This is what is called birth. The arising of becoming, there is the arising of birth. Venerable Sariputta is following up the line of dependent origination, so I won't go too far into this, but he's saying that you took birth because you had the idea of an existing being. You had the idea, I am a thing and I need to continue. And in a desire to continue, you put in the causes and conditions for rebirth. That is why birth occurred. With the ending of this sense of, I am an existing being, I am a stable being, I'm a permanent being, I have a soul, I am important, I need to continue. With the cessation of that craving, you have the cessation of rebirth. And with the cessation of rebirth, you will no longer grow old, grow sick, or die. That's how that works. And so I won't go too far into it, but we continue up the chain of dependent origination. What is becoming? There are three kinds of becoming: sense sphere becoming, fine material becoming, immaterial becoming. With the arising of clinging, there is the arising of becoming. So he's following it up and saying, well, becoming has a source. And what is it? It's clinging. And what is clinging? Yeah, what is the origin of clinging, the cessation of clinging, the way leading to cessation of clinging? There are four kinds of clinging: clinging to sense pleasures, clinging to views, clinging to rules and observances, clinging to a doctrine and idea of self. With the arising of craving, there is the arising of clinging. With the cessation of craving, there is the cessation of clinging. Mhm. So we have these four kinds of clinging to sense pleasures, views, rules and observances, and self-view, identity view, yeah? And those who are discerning can say, oh, wait, clinging to views, rules and observances, identity view. That sounds a lot like the fetters that prevent stream entry. And you'd be right. Yeah, with the addition of sense pleasures there, which are the fetters that keep you from once returning and non-returning, you have the basis of stream entry, yeah? When you get rid of clinging to views, speculative views specifically, the cause of doubt, when you get rid of the clinging to the idea of rules and observances as the way out of suffering. If I just do this, I will get out of suffering. When you get rid of the idea of a permanent self, you have uprooted the very basis for clinging. Now, most of us will understand that when we first do this, when we first break through this, the stream enterer is not yet free of all suffering. Yeah, they still have more to do. I mean, not just in the fact that they've got to deal with that whole big project of sense pleasures and anger, which is closely tied to that, but also to get the subtle bits of ego out of there, the idea, the notion I am that still lingers. But they begun the project, and there is no going back from that point. You have removed the nutriment, which keeps dependent origination going indefinitely. You will eventually, though it might take a couple of lifetimes, you will reach the conclusion, yeah? But clinging has a source, and it has a reason that it happens. And the reason is craving. And what is craving? Venerable Sariputta says there are six classes of craving: craving for forms, craving for sounds, craving for odors, craving for flavors, craving for tangible sensations, and craving for mind objects. With the arising of feeling, there is the arising of craving. So this is dependent origination. Where does feeling come from? Sariputta says there are six classes of feeling: feeling born of eye contact, ear contact, nose contact, tongue contact, body contact, and mind contact. With the arising of contact, there is the arising of feeling. And we talked about this at length, I think, last Wednesday, how it's very counterintuitive, counterintuitive for us to think of perception and feeling and the definitions of them and see them as like one and the same thing. But even though we're taught them as separate things, and they are separate things, we can't actually pull them apart. Yeah, and this nature dependent origination is by the time contact is happening, feeling is right there. Yeah, there's no chance to get in and separate it. Yeah. Now, where does contact come from? There's six classes of contact: eye contact, ear contact, nose contact, tongue contact, body contact, mind contact. With the cessation of the sixfold bases. But what are the sixfold bases? There are the six bases, which I've been saying over and over: the eye base, the ear base, the nose base, the tongue base, the body base, and the mind base. Yeah. And these sense bases can cease. That is one of the amazing things we also find in meditation is that when we reach a certain level of samadhi, and not even like super deep samadhi, but basically we subdue the hindrances, five of the senses go quiet. And all that remains in that space is the mental sense space. We're aware that thoughts are still arising. There are still mental processes, but we're not seeing, we're not hearing, we're not smelling, we're not tasting, we're not touching. We have a sense of an awareness of a body, but it is a mental object. And that is a wonderful thing. And it shows us that even these sense bases are just conditioned phenomena. They can cease. Yeah. But how do they cease? Where do they come from so that we can find the way to their cessation? Well, they come from what we call nama rupa, mentality, materiality. And what is mentality, materiality? Feeling, perception, volition, contact, and attention. These are called mentality. The four great elements, the form derived from the four great elements, these are called materiality. So this mentality and materiality is what we call mentality materiality. That is namarupa. With the arising of consciousness, there is the arising of mentality and materiality. Following that up, well, what is consciousness? Well, we've talked about consciousness is this awareness, this something just below awareness, the cognition. It is a Dhamma. It is something that arises and ceases, but its function is to recognize things at the sense bases. So you have six kinds of consciousness: eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, and mind consciousness. And as we continue to explore, we say, yeah, isn't it interesting that we tend to think in terms of consciousness being this common thread, like I am conscious, I have consciousness, I am consciously aware of what is going on. We tend to think of it as one thing moving unbroken through time. But when we really get down into it, it is not one thing. It is a bunch of different things arising and ceasing one after the other. And the mind plays this magic trick, linking them together to make it seem like they're one coherent package. Yeah. And just because they can cease, just because nose consciousness and tongue consciousness do not occupy the same space, they can't exist at the same time. We realize they're just things. Consciousness is not stable, not consistent. Mm. So it can cease, but then where does it come from? Yeah, this is another way of arriving at right view. We might understand sankharas, formations. So Venerable Sariputta says there are three kinds of formations: the bodily formation, the verbal formation, and the mental formation. With the arising of ignorance, there is the arising of formation. With the cessation of ignorance, there's a cessation of formations. Yeah, to make a very long topic as short as possible, we're running on a bit. If you might recognize this doesn't show up in a lot of places, but the idea of the body formation, the verbal formation, and the mental formation plays a lot into samadhi and the development of the jhanas. Because, as I said, when you reach a certain level of subduing the hindrances, just a surface level of samadhi, you'll notice that the bodily formation will cease. You will no longer have an urge to move your body, to do things with your body. And even your awareness of the body might shift and go quiet in different ways. And that is, it's far from being a bad thing or a scary thing. It's a wonderful thing. You realize what a weight, what a terrible burden the body can be. Yeah. And then the verbal formation ceases next. But first there's the first jhana, of course. The verbal formation's still there for that. But once one transcends the first jhana, gets the second jhana, they get to the great silence, which is the verbal formation goes quiet. This generation of opinions, perceptions, biased interpretations of things goes quiet. And this is something to be amazed if you're able to experience it in this lifetime, that even this thing which seems so essential is not. It can cease, and there's still awareness, there is still consciousness. Yeah, and then there is the mental formation, which we're talking about also has nutriment. It needs nutriment to continue. Venerable Sariputta goes on. He says, "Well, what is the cause of formations? Well, it's all rooted in ignorance. What is ignorance? And this is where we get to it cycles back on itself. It cycles to the Four Noble Truths. Ignorance is not knowing about suffering, not knowing about the origin of suffering, not knowing about the cessation of suffering, not knowing about the way leading to the cessation of suffering. Yeah. But what is the cause of ignorance? Venerable Sariputta says, well, there are these taints, these outflows. Yeah, the taint of sense desire, the taint of becoming, the taint of ignorance. The arising of ignorance, there is the arising of taints. With the cessation of ignorance, there's the cessation of taints. And so we have this other kind of circular pattern where ignorance is fed by desire, and desire feeds ignorance. And dealing with either of them will fix the problem. Yeah. They only work because desire, the fuel, feeds the ignorance, and ignorance causes us to keep the desire going, yeah, to generate new desires. If we get in the way of that pattern, then like a fire that runs out of fuel, it burns down and eventually ceases. And this is how the sutta ends. Yeah, Venerable Sariputta says he's reached the sort of pinnacle, the extent of dependent origination. There isn't anything beyond this, nothing more that needs to be said. If you deal with ignorance, you deal with desire, you have fixed the problem. You can definitely be said to be one who has right view. So he says, when noble disciples understood the taints, the origin of the taints, the cessation of the taints, and the way leading to the cessation of the taints, they entirely abandon the underlying tendency to lust, to aversion, and to the view and conceit I am. And by abandoning ignorance and arising true knowledge, they here and now make an end of suffering. This too is a noble disciple who is one who has right view, whose view is straight and has unwavering confidence in the Dhamma. They have arrived at the true Dhamma. And that's what the Venerable Sariputta said, and the bhikkhus were satisfied and delighted in the Venerable Sariputta's words. All right. And so this is not the end of the story in terms of right view. It is sort of the beginning. It's a starting off point. Yeah. What is right view? Well, the whole path deals with right view, and the whole path relies on right view, and one feeds the other. The more we practice, the more we understand what the practice is about. Yeah. We do need some sort of impetus, some sort of spark, some sort of beginning to get the whole thing going. And that is where we talk about the words of another, the teaching of the Dhamma. This is the spark that makes us aware that there is this possible project, there is this possible goal. Before then, we were just wandering in samsara. We didn't have a direction, we didn't have a goal. And so essential and non-essential didn't apply. It was all kind of the same. Yeah. But once we hear the Dhamma, we realize that there is suffering and there is an end of suffering, and we get the project. And then right view is possible. It's not always present instantly at that moment, but it is possible. And if we work at it, we will find that more and more the sense of the goal is always present. Yeah, we will know this because we'll start to see thoughts of renunciation, non-ill will, non-cruelty, basic, leading to right speech, leading to right action. But we will also see when we start to know, when we have thoughts of clinging, thoughts of ill will, thoughts of cruelty, we'll stop doing that. Don't stop thinking that way. This is not going to help. This is going to make things worse. When that thought starts to arise, well, then, yes. Yeah, that's also a sign of right view. That's also a sense we have a project and we know what's getting in the way of it. Yeah, and so we can just keep cultivating whatever led to that understanding, and you will eventually get to, just as the Venerable Sariputta is saying, you'll get to the end of ignorance, the end of craving. You will complete this project, and at that point, the question of right view and wrong view actually stops mattering again. Yeah. Because when you have completed this project, you don't need to worry about the project anymore. Notice that it's like the raft. Once you've crossed the river, you can just set it floating for somebody else to use. Yeah. You don't have to put it on your back and carry it with you. But while we're working on it, then yes, let's all help develop right view in ourselves and try to nurture it along with thoughtful, wise words in others wherever possible. And in this way, we'll keep moving towards the end of suffering. So I offer these thoughts for you this simple evening.